Unit 8 is the muscular system. Let's start into the muscular system by discussing the characteristics of muscle. The first characteristic of muscle that we'll look at is contractility. Muscle fibers can shorten when stimulated. The next characteristic we'll look at is excitability. Muscles have the ability to receive and respond to a stimulus. In this case, we're looking at someone using a machine that will send electrical signals through their muscle, causing contraction. But in our normal everyday life, in order to contract a muscle, we send nervous signals to that muscle that will then stimulate the muscle or excite the muscle to contract. Another characteristic of muscle is extensibility, that fibers can extend beyond their original shape. So here is somebody who's stretching their muscle during exercise, and what they are doing is extending that muscle beyond their original shape in order to stretch it, to lengthen the leg muscles that he is stretching, in this case, slightly beyond their original length. And finally, elasticity, the ability of a muscle to recoil and resume its resting length after being stretched. So really, in these last two cases, under both these conditions, muscles can be stretched in order to perform a stretch during exercise or in order to do the splits as this person is doing here. But in the end, the muscle is elastic and it has the ability to recoil and then go back to its resting length after being stretched. So all muscles have these four characteristics. But next, let's look at the three different types of muscle tissues that exist. The first is skeletal muscle, the muscles that we tend to be used to in terms of muscles that are attached to our skeleton and allow us to move. These type of muscles are voluntary. The cells are long and thread-like, and they are striated. You can see in the cell image above, there are lines that are transverse across the cells, and these are striations. The cells are multinucleated. They have multiple nuclei per cell. As I mentioned earlier, they are stimulated via nerves in order to contract. That contraction produces movement. Smooth muscle are another type of muscle tissue. These cells have no striations. They are spindle shape, pointy at each end. And different than the skeletal muscle, they only have one centrally located nuclei. These muscles are found in our organs, things like our stomach and our intestines. These are the muscles that allow those organs to move. So in this case, to move food through the stomach and through the intestine. They are involuntary muscles. These are not muscles that we consciously control with our brains. The third type of muscle tissue is cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is striated, like the skeletal muscle. It's uninucleated, so one nucleus, like the smooth muscle, but the cells are actually branching. So you can see here, while they kind of look cylindrical, there are actually branches to them, unlike the skeletal muscle. And they are not spindle-shaped like the smooth muscle. The cells fit tightly together at unique junctions, called intercalated discs. They're marked in this image as tight junctions, but the term for them is intercalated discs. We'll take a closer look at those when we get to the unit on the heart. Cardiac muscle is only found in the heart. The muscle of the blood vessels in the circulatory system would actually be smooth muscles. So what are the major functions of muscles? One function is movement. All body movements require muscle contractions. Blood flowing through our vessels, our heart contracting. Smooth muscle and the walls of those vessels maintain blood pressure. As I mentioned earlier, movement of the muscles in our stomach and our intestines move food through those organs. Posture maintenance. Skeletal muscles continually contract and relax in order for us to maintain posture and muscle tone. Joint stability. As muscles pull on our bones, they cause movement, and they also help to stabilize the joints of our skeleton. For example, in our shoulder, we have the rotator cuff muscles that help hold our shoulder in place. When someone has damage to these muscles, they often have issues with their shoulder dislocating. Heat generation. During muscular contraction, heat is generated. This process is vital to help maintain body temperature. Overall, our skeletal muscles make up about 40% of our body mass. And then finally, to help guard entrances and exits of the body. Our urinary and digestive systems have openings that we want to control when things enter and when things leave those systems. So here we have an image of our digestive system at the anus, and there are two sets of muscles. The internal ones that make up the internal sphincters that are made up of smooth muscle and are involuntary, and then the external sphincters, which are made up of skeletal muscle that are voluntary. These provide voluntary control over processes like swallowing and urination and defecation. Let's identify the main organs and accessory structures of the muscular system. In the muscular system, each skeletal muscle is an organ. This is similar to the skeletal system, where each bone was an organ. Tendons assist in the function of the muscular system. In order to go into this a little bit further, let's zoom in on a specific muscle. If we were to look at the upper arm here and then zoom in on it, there's a number of muscles here, so a number of organs within that upper arm. If we were to remove some of those muscles, here we have the bicep of the upper arm. If we were to cross-section that bicep, we would see this, where we have the humerus, one of the bones it's attached to. We have the muscle itself, the bicep, and then we have the fascia that wraps around the muscle. The fascia is an external covering of connective tissue that separates one muscle from another. When it's wrapped around the muscle, we call it fascia, but then it continues off of the muscle and forms the tendon. The tendon then continues and wraps around the bone, which then is called the periosteum that we saw in the skeletal system. So let's focus in on the muscle here and discuss why it's considered an organ. As I stated, just like in the skeletal system where each bone was an organ, each muscle is an organ because it's made up of different types of tissue. So in this case, we have muscle tissue. Here is one single muscle fiber or muscle cell. But overall in this muscle, we have many muscle fibers. Additionally, we have blood vessels within the muscle. We also have motor neurons in the muscle. And then within that muscle, we also have a variety of connective tissue that we'll look at here in a moment. And so remember that an organ is a structure consisting of a group of tissues with a specialized function. Muscles are composed of all these different tissues, and then they provide the functions that we mentioned before of movement, maintaining posture, stabilizing joints, generating heat, and guarding entrances and exits. We've already identified the function of the tendons, of attaching muscles to bones, and how that it is continuous with the fascia and then the periosteum that wraps around the bone. But on a microscopic level, if we were to look at this portion of the tendon here, we would see something like this. Very similar to the ligaments that we discussed in the skeletal system, there are fibroblasts within the tendon, and then there are collagenous fibers within the tendon that are all running in the same direction in order to make a nice solid connection between the muscle and the bone. To zoom out a little bit from this cross-section of a muscle, we can look at the arm again in order to identify the structure and function of tendons. Every muscle is attached to a bone at least 2 points. So here we have the biceps brachii, and here it is attached actually to 2 bones. But these 2 tendons here are called the origin, because the origins of any muscle are the tendons that are attached to the immovable bone, a bone that does not move during the action of that muscle. On the other end of the bicep, we have the insertion. This is attached to the movable bone, because as we flex our bicep, the radius that it's attached to is actually the bone that moves up towards our upper arm. So the origin actually stays in the same place as you go through that flexion motion, but the insertion tendon actually moves the radius, pulls on the radius, which is moving in that motion. The bicep actually gets its name from the fact that it has 2 origins. Brachii is from the Latin word for arm. So this is the arm muscle that has 2 origins. Here we have the tricep on the other side of the arm. And the tricep actually has 3 origins, which is why it's named that way. Here we have the insertion for the tricep. This is the tendon that is actually attached to the bone that moves during the motion that the tricep produces.